Throughout this offseason, we've talked about risers, we've talked about fallers, we've talked about rookies that we like, we've talked about training camp news, we've talked about best players and best values, but today we're just going to keep it simple. We're going to talk about our guys, the guys that we are trying to draft in as many leagues as possible, the guys that we are trading for, the guys that we're looking at in startups. And today, Jeff Bell and I, we picked one quarterback, one running back, one wide receiver, one tight end, and then one flex slash sleeper. We were a little liberal with how we turned that one. But Jeff, let's go ahead and kick this one off, starting with the quarterbacks. Who's a quarterback this year that you just find yourself drafting a lot that you are way ahead of consensus on?
It's going to be Caleb Williams for me. And I think when it really comes down to it, we know what we were waiting for last year in Dynasty especially, but he was the unquestioned 101 in so many rookie drafts last year. Then having the total package that he does have, the ability to accrue points on the ground. And when you look at where we know how bad last year was. And it was quarterback 16 last year with coaching changes, with all kinds of different things going on there, with the offensive line questions, without a true running back stepping up. And then now you turn around and, I mean, you know it. You are a Bears fan. You're doing the training camp reports. The reports have not been glowing out of training camp, but that has created a situation where he's fallen. And now you're basically getting him close to where he finished last year. And so there's certainly Ben Johnson's trying to build something from the ground up there. And maybe there is a very conservative approach that comes in with Caleb Williams. But at the same time, you're looking at a player that has elite weapons around him, has an elite skill set when it comes to gathering fantasy points. And I wrote a spotlight about him about a month ago, looking at when you really break down these big game capability of the high-end quarterbacks of the Josh Allens and the Jaden Daniels and the Lamar Jacksons. Caleb Williams had those same games as those guys. It was just that his lower games were so low. And so that's where, if he still has that in play and he can still have that ceiling, which I don't see any reason why he shouldn't. It's not like he is battling an injury or anything like that. He still has the physical skill set. If he can just get rid of those lows, he can deliver and be a great value.
I'm definitely picking up what you're selling here, Jeff. I have also been bullish on Caleb Williams this year, but allow me to big brain this one a little bit and see if there might be an opportunity to get Caleb Williams for even cheaper than he already is. As you said, the camp reports have not been glowing. It sounds like Ben Johnson is riding him really hard. They're treating him like a rookie this year. And I don't know if we're going to see immediate success in this Ben Johnson offense. Even if you look at Jared Goff and Ben Johnson, when they had their matrimony together in Detroit, there wasn't immediate success there. It took some time for them to kind of blossom into what that Lions offense is. And what I look at, we talk about this all the time, right? Like with Isaiah Likely last year, the week one overreactions, how much people freak out, especially in a primetime game. We can look back 2 years ago. Remember, like, what the heck? I drafted Jahmyr Gibbs 102 and he's losing touches to David Montgomery. And last year it was Isaiah Likely has stolen the job from Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews is dead. This year, week one, Monday Night Football, the Chicago Bears play against the Minnesota Vikings. And we know that the Minnesota Vikings are going to blitz very, very heavily. They're going to throw a lot at Caleb Williams. And I think, frankly, I mean, already they're underdogs in that game. Like, you can already bet on week one. The Bears are underdogs in that matchup. So I think there's already a seed of panic for a lot of people that are holding on to Caleb Williams. And if he goes out there and gets the snot kicked out of him week one in a primetime game, then it's going to be a fire sale on Caleb Williams. So I do like going out and getting him now, but I think that if you can be patient and hope that things break in that direction after week one, I think you could probably go out and get Caleb Williams for even cheaper. Of course, the opposite could happen though. Like if he comes out there and he torches the line or the Vikings in that matchup, then that window slams shut and you're never getting Caleb Williams for cheap again. But if you want to play with fire there, I think there might be an opportunity to buy low on Caleb Williams 3 weeks from now.
Yeah, I think that that's fair. And I think that that's a good call out there because you're exactly right. The defense that I would expect the Vikings to play I mean, we saw another Bears quarterback that it made look very bad a couple years ago. Of course, that was Justin Fields coming off that red hot game against Washington, playing at Minnesota that next game. And they really blitzed the heck out of him. And it was kind of the end of his Bears career almost.
Basically, yeah, that was the game where they had to just completely turn the playbook. They couldn't push the ball downfield at all. Like, they knew that he was going to struggle with those blitz concepts, and they said, all right, we're going to put you in shotgun, and you're going to throw 38 of your 40 passes today are going to be screen passes to DJ Moore. And that's kind of what they had to do to work around that. I think, since we're talking about the game here, Dennis Allen has also been playing a lot of dime packages, blitzing from all over the place in practices. So there is the whole iron sharpens iron thing, where he has been getting a lot of complex looks from Kyler Gordon and Tyreek Stevenson and Jaquan Brisker and all these kind of hybrid players on the Bears defense. So that might help set him up for a decent showing against Minnesota. But anyway, we're 6 minutes into the show and we're still just rambling on and on about the first player. Let's go ahead and talk about my guy at the quarterback position. And this is a guy that I really started to like during the rookie cycle as we were looking at all these prospects before the draft. And of course, he went number 1 overall, Cam Ward. And you'd think that a guy going number 1 overall would have all of this buzz around him, but it is unbelievable, Jeff. Like, the lack of buzz around Cam Ward is just astonishing. I have never seen anything like this before. And I did a study a while back looking at how quarterback draft capital compares or correlates to NFL success. And the reality is that for a quarterback drafted number 1 overall, he has over an 80% chance of getting 5+ years as a starter. So people remember the bus, Jamarcus Russell and Tim Couch. But the reality is that most quarterbacks drafted first overall, they get a little bit of extra time to develop. And when you look at Cam Ward, I also think that he has a good skill set for fantasy football. Now, he's not going to confuse anybody for being Lamar Jackson or anything like that. But I think 400, 500, 600 rushing yards is very much so in his range of outcomes. It's not that he's a super athlete by any means, but he does play with a lot of grit and tenacity, and he's willing to scramble. And I don't want to overread too much into a preseason game, but I really liked what I saw from him in this first preseason game. He was getting the ball to Calvin Ridley deep downfield. He was getting through his progressions quickly. He looked like a calm and composed quarterback. And like I said, right now, there's just so little buzz around him. We were doing all these startups earlier in the offseason where I was getting Cam Ward in round 5 of startups in super flex leagues. So one of these guys that I am really going to hold the torch for. I think he is a good player. And even more than just what you see on the field is the off the field stuff. Him showing up early to practice, him really championing behind his guys, and taking accountability when they have bad practices. I think that he is a good leader. I think he's a good football player. And I'm just kind of surprised by how much the Dynasty community is overlooking him.
Yeah, and really for him, I think the biggest thing that he's got this year is the toughness. I think he's just a very, very tough player. And I do think that the not lack of talent. I mean, the offensive line is very talented, and it's got arguably the best offensive line coach in football. And I don't think that people understand that realize that really when it comes down to it, he needs one receiver. He needs one more receiver. They have Calvin Ridley, Chico Okonkwo could be there. They need one more receiver. And what did we see last year when it came down to the trade deadline? We saw Amari Cooper. We saw DeAndre Hopkins. We saw multiple receivers move there. The Deontay Johnson trade. And while those didn't really work out great, but I'm also thinking back to when Josh Allen was a rookie and they went out and got Calvin Benjamin in the middle of the year. Another one didn't exactly work out great, but my point is, I think you really just getting into the season and seeing maybe Ward's got it, that might give them enough confidence to go out and say, we need to get it one more guy. Like, we're not going to be able to squeeze by this with the Van Jefferson and with the ghost of Tyler Lockett and then James Prochet, whatever it might be. I think that could be the impetus to go out and maybe explore the trade market if a receiver shakes free somewhere around the league. But I like that call. I just think there's a lot to like there when it comes to a fantasy package. And we've seen quarterbacks that have been doubted in the past, young players. We saw CJ Stroud 2 years ago. Like, he was kind of written off. Like, I think that nobody expected CJ Stroud to do what he did his rookie year, and he delivered on that.
Yeah, and we just talked about that on the show yesterday, which if you haven't checked it out, please do. Podcast only. We're not putting this one out on YouTube, but Jeff and I are doing these mega episodes going through every single bit of training camp news with Dan Henry, a really sharp football guy staffer that we are privileged to be able to talk to this time of year. So definitely check that out if you haven't. Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. But you did make that comp to CJ Stroud, and that's something that I've talked about a lot this offseason, is that this feels so reminiscent to CJ Stroud, where people are just presumed before he ever even took a snap that, he's just not that good for whatever reason. That was just the consensus opinion on CJ Stroud. And Nico Collins, a decent wide receiver one, but not a game changer or anything like that. And then Nico Collins shows up. CJ Stroud shows up. Nico Collins immediately becomes a wide receiver one. He starts elevating all of the talent around him as well. That's not assuredly going to happen with Cam Ward, but it is a possibility. And right now, looking at how low he is valued, it seems like you're drafting him darn close to his floor. So Cam Ward, stamp of approval. That is one of my guys this year. Jeff, let's talk about some running backs.
Yeah, I'm going to not exactly a dynasty play. Maybe it is a dynasty play, but one that I'm smashing every single time at his ADP is Alvin Kamara. He's sitting and you're able to get him in the 5th round, an underdog, 5th round of DraftKings. And I think that that's a player that, and we've talked about, you've talked about, our friend Dan has talked about how good he was last year up until that injury. I was just listening today with our friend Chris Harris. You were talking about Alvin Kamara on that show and about how he was pretty much exactly like Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley for most of last year. And then the injury at the end of the year really put it out of sight, out of mind, and then created the situation where now you can get a lot of value there. And there's a lot of questions about what that offense is going to look like, a lot of concern there around that offense. But when you're trying to implement either a rookie quarterback or a young quarterback, Alvin Kamara is going to be that player's best friend. And so I think that sets up very, very well in any sort of PPR scoring. And then just the dynasty value that you can get if you're a contender right now. Is it a second for Alvin Kamara, a second and maybe like
I just pulled up. Yeah, a second.
Yeah.
Saying Josh Downs, you can get Josh Downs or Tua Tagovailoa are adjacent values to Alvin Kamara at the moment.
Yeah, so if you consider yourself a contender, or you need that one more piece to consider a contender, like a second and like a DJ Giddens or some like a deep running back like that on an Alvin Kamara team might be a really good way to go about and get that. We know the 2026, there's not been a lot of hype and buzz around the 2026 rookie class. And so you'll go out, grab Alvin Kamara with that second, make the playoffs, win the championship, make it that 2.12, and don't even worry about what's going to be available on the board. Enjoy a championship.
Yeah, Alvin Kamara, before getting injured last year, was the RB2 in PPR scoring. We try to anticipate these fall offs before they happen. And sometimes, it's injury related where an older running back gets hurt and then that's just the end of the road for him. But we also look for dips in efficiency. And Alvin Kamara isn't showing those dips in efficiency. He's still pulling targets at the rate that he has throughout his entire career, still having the breakaway runs, still breaking tackles, all the things we want to see for a running back. So, in Dynasty, obviously you're only targeting him if you are a contender. But, looking at redraft rankings, which is, this time of year, we are kind of looking at this 1 year window. How are we going to do this year? Alvin Kamara, I've got him as my RB11. I'm looking at him as an RB1 for this season. Of course, that shelf life in Dynasty changes the calculus a little bit for how you want to value him. But yeah, if you're a contender and you can get him for a second, that is just such an easy move to make right now. I'm going to talk about my running back, and Jeff, I'm not talking about a contending piece, although maybe he will work on a contender. TreVeyon Henderson is a guy that, I was a big fan of coming out of Ohio State. And this was a guy 2 years ago that many were talking about as the number one running back in the class. Then in 2024, he and Quinshon Judkins split touches a little bit. Efficiency dipped ever so slightly. And then I think the emergence of Ashton Jinty and Omarion Hampton just kind of made people forget how good of a running back TreVeyon Henderson is. And then even more surprising was at the draft when Quinshon Judkins was drafted ahead of him. But again, I talk about Cam Ward. I like what I saw in that first preseason game. I don't want to overreact too much to preseason, but I got to say what I saw in the preseason definitely confirmed my priors about TreVeyon Henderson. This is a guy with blistering speed. First touch ever on an NFL field is a 100-yard kick return. And then we saw him stepping on offense. He's catching passes. He's breaking tackles. He's getting breakaway runs. All the things you would expect to see from TreVeyon Henderson. And when I look at him, he's just cut from such a similar cloth of all of the guys that are just cheat codes in fantasy. Alvin Kamara, what Breece Hall did before his injury. Jahmyr Gibbs, one of these guys that can rip off big plays, catch passes, and just accumulate so many fantasy points. He's already getting rave reviews from the entire New England beat. Josh McDaniels has talked about some of the fastest players he's ever coached, and Shane Vereen and Danny Woodhead, and said, yeah, those guys were fast, but TreVeyon is fast. And we're recording this episode on Wednesday. I don't know if you saw it today, Jeff. Drake Drake May hit TreVeyon Henderson in practice on a little 10-yard wheel route, and TreVeyon Henderson broke one tackle off to the races 60 yards after the catch for a 70-yard touchdown. So, I mean, this guy, every time he touches the ball, has an opportunity to score. And like I said, confirming some of my priors here, but I saw so much Jahmyr Gibbs in his game. And when you watch Jahmyr Gibbs, when he first came into the NFL, you could just say, this guy moves different. He's got contact balance that not many other guys have. And that's exactly what I see when I see TreVeyon Henderson out there.
Yeah, and I think that there's the belief that they're going to take him along slow, or that it's going to be a committee. They're going to have Ramondre Stevenson there. And I do think
Stevenson got hurt today.
Oh, did he? What kind of hurt did he get?
Doesn't seem serious, but I know he had to leave practice with something. If you keep talking, I'll look into it and try to get some more info.
But I see it much more as the genie's out of the bottle type of situation of like, this guy is different, and we saw that, and it is. I mean, I watched a lot of TreVeyon Henderson. Everybody knows I'm a Ohio State fan, so I've definitely watched a lot of Henderson over the last 4 years. But even in that preseason game, you see that kick return touchdown, and he had another run at the sideline where it was okay. Like I've watched a decent amount of NFL football, and I don't see very, very many running backs that bring that level of explosion to the position. And I think you're seeing that, and they're certainly seeing that every single day. The Patriots view themselves as a up and coming team that is going to push for the AFC East, and I don't think they're going to have kids gloves with TreVeyon Henderson. And part of that too is having a player that's had 4 years at Ohio State and very experienced. And there's no question about him understanding blocking in the passing game, those types of things that might contribute to a rookie not getting on the field. That's where maybe his strength lies. And so that's where there's a lot of upside scenario. And I love that call there. I think that he's an asset, a difference maker in redraft or in Dynasty immediately right now in year one.
And I think that, when you got a young guy, it doesn't matter whether you are rebuilding or contending, every team can benefit from having a guy like TreVeyon Henderson on there. I looked it up too. There might be some more clarity by the time this episode comes out. We are recording late on Wednesday night. Right now, they're just calling in an undisclosed injury, something that he picked up in the preseason opener. He was working off to the side with trainers today during practice. Mike Vrabel said he doesn't expect it to be anything long-term. So who knows? We might have more clarity by the time this episode releases. But right now, as of Wednesday night, all we know is that Ramondre Stevenson is not practicing with an injury that he picked up in the preseason. All right, Jeff, let's talk about some wide receivers. Who's a wide receiver you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, I'm going to discuss Zay Flowers. And I think for Zay Flowers, there is the belief that there's a ceiling on him. And maybe he hit a ceiling last year. But I see him as a player that he was wide receiver 24 last year. Right now in Football Guys ADP, wide receiver 27. Going into year 3, attached to Lamar Jackson. Why can't he stack on just a little bit more volume? Or why can't he only had 4 touchdowns last year off of 78 receptions. So why doesn't that open up for him? 74 receptions, 4 touchdowns, a little bit of touchdown regression, a little bit more volume in there. And again, wide receiver 24 last year, wide receiver 27 ADP, still young, still in the early portion of his career in what we know is an elite offense with Lamar Jackson, who threw for 4,000 yards last year, threw for 41 touchdowns last year. So I think that there is the potential for basically you're buying a wide receiver 1 in a high-end offense, and he's not valued in that way, that if just a little bit of Isaiah Likely being out, or maybe Mark Andrews slowing down, or whatever it might be, slides towards Zay Flowers' direction, then okay, now we're talking about a top 15 type receiver, and you can still see the value rise off his dynasty rank.
Yeah, I wonder if I'm still just like a little bit sour about Marquise Brown, a guy that I drafted very, very aggressively during his time in Baltimore, and a guy who, like, the underlying peripherals were great. Like, he was pulling targets, he was making big plays, but it was just a low volume offense. And granted, that was a very different offense at that point in time. Like, Lamar Jackson was still a raw passer, still trying to figure out how to play at the NFL level. He is a much, much better passer now. But I think the one thing that scares me a little bit with Zay Flowers is that the Baltimore Ravens were 31st last year in pass attempts, and they were riding super hot. And I think that when you compare, median efficiency, you can always plan on the Ravens, especially the Lamar Jackson Ravens team, to be well ahead of median efficiency. So that's why you can get Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman and Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews and Derrick Henry and Justice Hill all finding paths to fantasy relevance, but it does almost feel like a little bit of a paper tiger. That being said, Derrick Henry is getting a little bit older now, 31 years old. They've already talked about wanting to take some of the workload off of him and put it on Keaton Mitchell. So we have seen this team very, very run heavy over the years, but Lamar Jackson is a much better passer, and I'd like to see them maybe throwing the ball a little bit more. We know Todd Monken, it's in his blood to want to throw the ball a lot. This team was just pummeling teams so much last year that they weren't in positions where they needed to throw. But at the end of the day, Zay Flowers, like you said, there's a lot to like there. He is a young first-round player with really good underlying peripheral metrics that even if these next 2 years are similar to what we saw from Zay Flowers over the last 2 years, you're still getting wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 production, and then he's going to hit free agency at 26 years old where he can land in a much better situation. So, yeah, Zay Flowers, I like the player. I'm kind of talking myself out of it a little bit because I don't want to get burned again. But yeah, a good talented player, and sometimes it is as simple as that.
Well, let's look at Keep Trade Cut and some guys that are valued more than Zay Flowers right now. So Zay Flowers, 20, not quite 25, 24.9 years old. Jalen Waddle is valued more. Jalen Waddle's almost 2 full years older than Zay Flowers in a questionable offense in Miami. We have Devonta Smith is wide receiver 21. Zay Flowers, wide receiver 29.
Everything I just said about Zay Flowers, I can say about Devonta Smith, a run first team, a low volume team. Yeah. And Zay Flowers has
2 years older
right.
than him. Yes. And then 2 years older than him. And those are just two guys that, DK Metcalf. I mean, I think that
definitely takes Zay over DK. Yeah.
Yeah. So DK Metcalf is wide receiver 25. I mean, Matthew Golden, I like Matthew Golden quite a bit, but Matthew Golden's wide receiver 26, and Zay Flowers 2 years older than him. We've already seen Zay Flowers, what he can do. I just think that when you're looking at values and you're looking at a player that has upside, and I just think that, again, I think there is another level, I do believe, in Zay Flowers' game that he can get to because of if he's surviving on efficiency, but it's not even the touchdown efficiency yet. Again, he adds a little bit more volume and gets a little bit more touchdown regression, and they're having a different conversation about what we know is a very talented player and what we know is an elite high-end offense.
So let's go ahead and talk about the guy that I want to talk about. And this is a guy that I've talked about nonstop this offseason. I've made a lot of dynasty trades for him. I attacked him aggressively in the startups that we were doing. Jameson Williams. And Jeff, you and I, we kind of fought over this player, who we got to make my guy, Jameson Williams. And let's just, he is our guy. We both really, really like Jameson Williams. I was looking at industry rankings, and no shocker here to anybody that's been listening to the show. If you're familiar with expert consensus rankings over on Fantasy Pros, Jeff and I are both in that contest. And of the 200 plus analysts that have ranked Jameson Williams somewhere in their set of rankings, Jeff Bell and I are higher on Jameson Williams than everybody else. And it's just so easy to envision him taking that big step forward. I mean, this is a guy who is just hyper efficient with the touches that he receives. You know the story, torn ACL his rookie season, gambling suspension in year 2. But over the second half of last season, he started to put it together after week 10. So we're looking at, not a full half season, but a pretty decent sample size here. His pace was unbelievable. 120 targets, over 80 receptions, over 1,300 yards, and over 10 touchdowns would have been his 17-game pace. And if you look back last year, he finished, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was the wide receiver 19, I think. And that was with 2 games in the first half of the season where he scored less than 1 point. He was still a part-time player to start the year. We didn't see him really come on until the second half. So right now, if you're looking in redraft and best ball and things like that, he's getting drafted below last year's finish. And you look in Dynasty, this is a guy who was drafted very young, still just 24 years old, has a bright future ahead of him. And all we've heard out of Detroit's camp is that John Morton wants to feature him a little bit more than they have in the past, that he can run more routes now, that they're asking him to do more complex things. I felt like early in his career, he was kind of this gadgety player where they were hitting him on end arounds and, these little pick plays. We'd even see the hook and ladders, like whatever they could do to showcase his straight line speed. But now he's 3 years removed from the ACL tear. He looks sharp as a tack out there on the practice field. And this is a guy right now that I think people have just been frustrated over the years. He never really lived up to the expectations signs of him being a top 12 pick in the NFL draft, but now he's starting to put it together. And I think that there is just some boredom because it took so long for him to get there. So I've made a handful of trades. There was one I did recently where I traded Garrett Wilson. I'm going to butcher it. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it was Garrett Wilson for Jameson Williams and a few picks getting swapped around. I have those guys pretty tight in my dynasty rankings. Still a young player on a very good offense. Jameson Williams, can't get enough of him.
Yeah, and my guy over at Fantasy Points, Ryan Heath, wrote a really good article talking about McShanahan offenses and how they're able to scheme up to get the ball in their playmakers' hands. And I think the best way to describe it, I like to go to basketball so often when it comes to wide receivers, because it just feels natural to me. You're talking about different spacing and everything. And Amon-Ra St. Brown is kind of like maybe like a Klay Thompson, where it's like, amazing shooter. And like, if you were to put Klay Thompson on his own team in his prime, he could be the go-to scorer. You could have a very, very good team. And then it's like, you put him next to a Steph Curry, and it's like Steph Curry is just able to go to the basket and also shoot better and also do these different things. And I think that that's a little bit what the Lions receivers are here with Amon-Ra St. Brown, his ability to being one of the very, very best at what he does and living over the middle of the field and creating after the catch. But then you come in with just a guy that is more dynamic. I mean, bottom line, Jameson Williams is a more dynamic player than Amon-Ra St. Brown. I don't think that that's saying anything that anybody would disagree with. And so that's where you open up the potential to do different things with this player. And so much, a lot of pushback about Ben Johnson being gone, but at the same time, it's a fresh set of eyes. It's Ben Johnson to a certain level owed his success to Amon-Ra St. Brown. So it's like Amon-Ra St. Brown's the cash cow, like type thing of like, we're going to make sure he gets fed. You bring in a new set of eyes, a new vision on how players can be utilized. And they see Jameson Williams being that elite explosive player. And they say, let's figure this out with Jameson Williams and let's make it click.
I listened to everything you said there, but at the same time, I was also trying to comp every single skill position player on the Lions to a player on the Warriors then. And I think the best one that I've got is David Montgomery is definitely their Draymond Green, the guy that'll just go out there and punch you in the mouth and make you pay for any mistake that you make out there. This is fun, though. I think Jameson Williams, I would have thought more of a Kevin Durant than a Steph Curry. I think Jameer Gibbs.
Yeah, I think Kevin Durant. I mean, if you're going to go there, I mean, Jameer Gibbs is more the Steph Curry. I think that, and then I think Jameson would be the Kevin Durant. And then I feel like that's underselling. The whole hive. Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to add us to his list by the time the season comes around. And then he's like,
I heard those guys on the football guys
the first week. And he's going to say that number 1 is for Dave Kluge and number 2 is for Jeff Bell. Just by the way, here you go. Yeah. And we're going to be immortalized there. But yeah, no, it's
all because I comped him to Andre Iguodala.
And then, well, I mean, who gets Andrew Bogut? Are we giving that to Tim Patrick? Is that where we're going? But
I think so. Yeah. I'm still trying to figure out who Sam Laporta is, but tune in next week when Jeff.
I mean, Laporta's got to be Iguodala, I guess. If you're going to give David Montgomery, Draymond Green, I think then Laporta's got to be Iguodala.
Do you think this would let us know in the YouTube comments or the Spotify comments if you're listening?
Well, it's YouTube though, so there's a whole generation of YouTube that doesn't even know like that Warriors team from like that. That is a scary long time ago at this point. It's like 10 years ago now.
Maybe an article form, but yeah, I think I want to do a like comparing NFL superstars to 2000s NBA stars. Like we could have some fun with that one. Let's talk after the show and see if we could work something out there, Jeff. But yeah, I think enough about Jameson Williams. We know this guy could just be a potential superstar. And what I said, I talked about like the pace he was on over the second half of last year. That would have been the wide receiver 5 in scoring. If you want an idea of like how high the ceiling is for Jameson Williams, what he did over the second half of last year was like just behind Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams. I mean, this guy has potential to be an absolute superstar. So let's keep moving down the list, Jeff. We got some tight ends, and wouldn't you know it, both of us picked rookie tight ends to discuss that are our guys.
Yeah, and maybe it's because of Brock Bowers. Maybe it's because of Sam Laporta. I think it's just because these guys are good and they're in good opportunities. But I'm going to go with Tyler Warren in Indianapolis. And, I mean, I think it's fair to be, especially with seeing Adonai Mitchell come on a little bit, to be a little bit concerned about how that passing volume works out in Indianapolis. I mean, they could be 32nd in pass attempts. And when you've got 5 guys that you want to get targets to, that can be really tough to make work. That being said, I think when you break it down, I think the ceiling of Tyler Warren is higher than the ceiling of any other player there that could be a potential target for them. The optimum outcome of Warren and him clicking immediately, and it sounds like every indication that we've got out of camp seems to be that's the case, that this guy has shown up from day one and made a big impact. I'm still curious about if there's going to be any run game involvement, if it could be a tush push potential, anything like that, I think would be really kick Tyler Warren over the next tier. This is not going to be a situation where he's going to be Brock Bowers out here catching 112 balls, but he is the type of player that can be a significant red zone threat, that if he adds that rushing onto it, that he can make big plays down the seam, and he is a problem running down the field. And you put these things together, he's going to be a lot more Rob Gronkowski than what a Brock Bowers, where you've got basically a slot receiver that, God forbid anybody figures out that he's actually a slot receiver and we lose that tight end eligibility on Bowers. But Warren's kind of the more Gronkowski mold that can get you 10 to 12 touchdowns.
Yeah, and something that we've talked about a lot on this show, and we're gonna nerd out and get into some football X's and O's stuff here. But for tight ends to be productive long term, they have to be good blockers, and we have seen this with so many guys who come into the league that are these freak athletes that are so fast and they can just beat the defenses. And rip off these big plays, and we'll see that for a short little spurt, but it doesn't last long term, because then defensive coordinators realize, wait, we could just put a cornerback on this guy and he doesn't have the strength to be able, or the speed to be able to beat a cornerback. So the guys that you see have sustained success, when you think of Travis Kelce, when you think of George Kittle, when you think of Mark Andrews, these are guys that are also very, very good blockers. And we think about the guys that were flashes in the pan, Evan Ingram, and luckily he landed in a position where they didn't ask him to block, and they just said, hey, you're a slot receiver, and that worked out for him. But I also think of Mike Gesicki. I think Kyle Pitts is probably the most glaring example here of a guy who year one, they played him like a tight end, and he was getting mismatches against linebackers. And then in year two, they said, wait, we don't need to do that anymore. We could just throw a cornerback on him. And it just completely took away his ceiling. And the word we've been hearing about Tyler Warren is that he is a phenomenal blocker, that he has just been mauling guys in the blocking game. So that gives me high expectations for him, because then he can create that mismatch. And when you've got a guy like Tyler Warren out there, you can go up to the line with 2 play calls, a run and a pass, look at who is covering Tyler Warren. And if he's got a linebacker on him, then you can call him to run a seam up the middle where a linebacker is not going to be able to keep up with him, and he can gash the defense for 30, 40 yards across the seam. If they've got a cornerback on him, then you call a run play to that side, and Tyler Warren has the strength to just push that guy all the way to the corner and seal the edge. So there's just so many fun things you can do when you have these versatile players, but it is essential that they are able to block. And what we're hearing out of Indianapolis, on top of the creative usage and the running snaps and the hands and all those things, are also that he is taking very well to the run game. And that's what I want to see.
Yep, exactly. All around player.
And that brings me to another guy I want to talk about, Mason Taylor. And you might have thought I'd go with Colston Loveland here. I do like Colston Loveland a lot, but he's a guy that you got to pay up for. Right now, Mason Taylor is kind of getting buried. This was a very deep tight end class, and Mason Taylor just kind of gets lumped in with all of the other round 2 rookies. But I think he's the guy that can really separate himself from the pack this year. First of all, he's younger than all the other rookies that came in this year, so he is still a very green and malleable product that they're going to be able to turn into what they want him to be. We've talked nonstop about the NFL bloodlines with his father and uncle. We know all of those buzzy things, but I've said this about almost every player I've talked about. I don't want to overreact to training camp, and I don't want to overreact to preseason, but all we are hearing out of Jets camp is that this guy immediately, 3 days into Jets practice, they said he has stolen the tight end 1 role, and he is going to be that guy ahead of Jeremy Ruckert. And then you see these catches where he's jumping up and he's pulling down these, high balls that Justin Fields is throwing in the end zone. We see him laying out for these sprawling dives. We see him making plays after the catch, just big play after big play almost every single day. And you want to talk about an athlete. He was diagnosed with a high ankle sprain and missed a day of practice, and then came back and immediately made another huge play. So this is a guy who looks like he could be second on the team in targets behind Garrett Wilson. We saw Cole Kmet just turn in a tight end 1 season with Justin Fields a couple of years ago. So I think redrafters and best ball have kind of warmed up to the idea that Mason Taylor can be this guy who can be an immediate impact player, but he isn't getting that same buzz in dynasty circles right now. And he's a guy that, I don't know where he's going in startups right now, but a guy that I was regularly getting as, outside of the top 12, outside of the top 15. And if you can go out there now, I saw him falling into the late second, early third in rookie drafts. I would happily trade what's projected to be a late second or an early third in this 2026 draft to try to get Mason Taylor on my team.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up the numbers here real quick because he played with a little bit of talent. Yeah, and just kind of what I thought. So in 2023, playing with Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas, he was the number 3 receiver there. Malik Neighbors, 89 receptions, Brian Thomas, 68 receptions. Then Mason Taylor, 36 receptions, was the number 3 receiver. Kyron Lacey was the next receiver at 30, and then Josh Williams, running back, at 14. So that tells you, there wasn't. He had established himself really as the wide receiver 3 in a rotation, or the receiver 3, the tight end 3, whatever it might be, with Malik Neighbors, with Brian Thomas. So we know those guys are pretty good.
Yeah, and then last year we did see a little bit of a fall off from the quarterback play, and I think that's the other thing that kind of keeps Mason Taylor of value is he was never a huge stat compiler in college. But Jeff, you pointed this out to me, and when I went back and watched the tape, I realized he was the guy that was regularly stepping up in big moments where he wasn't the guy that they were, forcing the ball to 15 times a game like we saw with Tyler Warren, but he was a guy that late in the games when they needed a play, they would focus on him. So we haven't really seen the stat compilations yet, but clearly an early round 2 pick in a tight end is a premium investment. The Jets liked what they saw at LSU. And for me, the biggest movement throughout the offseason for Mason Taylor was just watching him at the combine. And you see him among his peers. They're all running the same drills. And he was just bigger and faster and smoother than everybody else on the field. And that's when I went back and kind of rewatched his tape through a new lens. And I saw the vision. And Jeff, I think both of us in our mock drafts, I know I had him going in the first round. I had him bouncing around to a few different spots. I liked him going to Washington as kind of the heir apparent for Zach Ertz. I also mocked him in one of my drafts going to Kansas City with the 31st overall pick. I thought he was a first round talent. Didn't go in the first round, but still an early second round pick is pretty meaningful investment in that position.
Yeah, you talk about big moments. It's a classic game, but there was a game against Alabama in overtime where Jaden Daniels scored a 25-yard touchdown run. They decided to go for 2 to do a walk-off win, and Jaden Daniels hit Mason Taylor for the 2-point conversion to beat Alabama. So I talk about players stepping up in big moments. But
just imagine, had that been a touchdown instead of a 2-point conversion, he might have gone 5 picks higher in the draft.
Yeah, well, if he had gone, 6 picks earlier and was a day 1 player, then forget about it. He might actually be good.
Yeah. All right, Jeff, we got one more here. I don't know. We're calling this a flex, a sleeper, a wild card, whatever you want to call it. Who's another guy that is your guy? No positional restraints here. Just lay another one on me.
Well, we fought before the show about Jameson Williams, about who gets the rights to claim him. We might fight on the show about this one here because I'm going to go with Xavier Worthy. And I know that you've been a little bit lower on Xavier Worthy, but I still see Worthy as a player that has grown as a receiver, that when you look at his immediate impact, when he got on the field, he had a huge game against Oklahoma in a wild back and forth game, but he was a vertical threat at Texas immediately because of that speed. Obviously, we know that speed. But then he changed his game throughout his career at Texas. And then his senior year, his junior year, his final year at Texas, he was the underneath guy. He was the volume guy with Adonai Mitchell as the guy over the top. And so that showed that Worthy built that within his game. And then it was a very similar progression in just 1 year with Kansas City, where he started out as the vertical field stretcher, and then they brought him closer to the line of scrimmage, became really the go-to guy, were very creative. And for me, when you watch the Chiefs season, obviously we know the record and how long they were undefeated, but it's really that Bills game in the regular season was the big change that coming out of it, where I think they were just trying to figure some things out before that game, and they were having these miracle wins and they were getting by just barely. And I think when they lost to the Bills, they said, this is not going to fly. This is not going to win us the Super Bowl. This is not going to be the three-peat that we want to see. And that's after that game was when they really changed how they utilized Xavier Worthy, got the ball in his hands more often, allowed him to create in space. And then even before that, if you remember back week one, I think it was very first touch in the NFL, he had that, I believe it was an end around against Baltimore when he scored the long touchdown there. We know the speed has shown up, and we've seen him be a playmaker in big moments. I mean, it was garbage time in the Super Bowl when he got that long touchdown against Philadelphia, but he caught a long touchdown in the Super Bowl. But what we've seen, some of these clips that come out of camp are true route running chops and just leaving the defender falling down, gasping for space. And I think that opens up a huge situation there. The other part of it, the injury and now suspension or looming suspension for Rashee Rice, that kind of creates a scenario, especially if Hollywood Brown was able to get back healthy, where Xavier Worthy can set himself to be in the little intermediate, like that type of player, short player, schemed up touches, those types of things. And I think that he can establish himself there, build upon what he showed last year. When Rashee Rice returns, ideally you start flipping these guys, and you don't have Rashee Rice just married to this basically a running back catching the ball 6 yards downfield and go blow somebody up. You allow him to stretch vertically a little bit. You start inverting them, and that makes your passing attack that much more challenging and that much more difficult to defend. And I think that Worthy is the key to unlocking really this Kansas City offense in general.
Yeah, I think this is one of the few players that you and I do disagree on a little bit. And I just, I saw it last year that the volume was there, and we love the volume in that offense. Like when Patrick Mahomes is throwing the ball to you 11, 10 times per game, that's definitely somebody you want in the fantasy sphere, but the production just wasn't there. We'd see the touchdowns every now and then. In the weeks that he didn't score a touchdown, he was a liability in the lineup, not having a 100-yard game until the Super Bowl. So I think that last year he was kind of forced into this role out of necessity because of all the injuries. It seemed like, they wanted Juju Smith-Schuster to take over that Rashee Rice role before they realized that wasn't going to work out. And then they make this midseason trade for DeAndre Hopkins. And eventually when they realized that every receiver there was either just dust or injured, they had no choice but to turn to Xavier Worthy. And you do make a good point that, Rashee Rice is looking at a possible suspension, so they could just put him right back in that same role that Worthy had last year. But even that, if we get it for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, or a whole season, I don't know if that's something that I would rely on him being in this gadgety role. Of course, he could just take the step forward. I'm going to throw one other thing out here, Jeff, and I don't know if you watched it today. The New Heights podcast, the Jason and Travis Kelce podcast, they had Taylor Swift on today. And did you hear how excited she was about Xavier Worthy, saying that she was screaming, running up and down her hallway when the team drafted Xavier Worthy? That concerns me a little bit. There are 1 million live viewers watching that, and a lot of people that are going to watch that after. That clip got shared out on social media. I wonder how much of a bump we're going to see in Xavier Worthy's value just because he got the Taylor Swift stamp of approval. This is uncharted waters. We've never had the biggest pop star in the world talk about how much she loves an NFL player before, and that could cause a spike in value alone.
Well, and really what I'm looking for, I think that the way that you should be looking for players in maybe the 4th round, 5th round, where Worthy's sitting, where Jameson Williams is sitting, where Zay Flowers is sitting, are players that are young players at the early portion of their career that have the capability to jump up rounds of value. That can be that guy that you're taking in round 1 or round 2 next year. And I think that the bull case, the best case scenario for Xavier Worthy working out is being one of those players that it's suddenly this is Tyreek Hill type of a player for Patrick Mahomes and the next generation Tyreek Hill, and we're taking him as a 1st round wide receiver. I think that that's in play. And I know you can talk about the efficiency, and the numbers are the numbers. I get that, certainly understand that, but the speed is definitely there. The comfort within the league is going to be even more this year. And if the Chiefs really are able to unlock some vintage Patrick Mahomes pushing the ball downfield, the big plays are going to be there. That the big plays are going to lead to 100-yard days and those types of things. And so I just think there's a lot of potential that when I'm looking for players that can rise rounds of value when we're sitting here at this time next year, Xavier Worthy is one of those players for me.
And I could absolutely see that. If he puts it together and he has a big season, people are going to get excited. 1st round draft capital, one of the fastest players in NFL history on the Chiefs. I could see him really skyrocketing in value, but I could also see the Kadarius Toney route and the Sky Moore route, where we see these guys show some promise their rookie season on a good team and then just end up becoming useless in a matter of years.
Look behind me. Look behind me, Dave. Look behind me.
What am I looking at?
You see these things behind me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think I'm lucky enough for Xavier Worthy to be Kadarius Toney?
Good point. Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, I mean, just the way the Chiefs have worked things out, but yeah, I mean, I do see the bull
The
case.
trade of the
Uh-huh.
the best players on the Chiefs.
Yeah,
Patrick Mahomes, the Bills traded him.
true.
Then the why am I blanking on the Trent McDuffie? There was the
Oh
story
my
that the
goodness, I
Bills
forgot
were
about
going to
McDuffie. Yeah,
draft him, and then the Chiefs jumped them to draft him, and now
yep,
he's like the best slot corner in the NFL. Basically,
yeah.
Xavier Worthy is going to be good because that is how the universe treats Bills fans.
I think that alone might that alone might be enough for me to change my stance there. But let's go ahead and talk about the last guy I want to talk about. I went a little bit deeper with this one, but a guy right now that you can probably get for a third round pick in your dynasty rookie drafts or in your dynasty drafts. Really, really suppressed in startups as well. I was getting this guy in rounds 14 through 18 of dynasty startups. DeMario Douglas right now, and again, I haven't done a startup in a couple of months, so I don't know how much he has climbed. But the buzz out of training camp is just that he has been unguardable. And if you look at how he played last year, he took 5 times as many snaps out of the slot as any other player did in New England. We know that slot role in a Josh McDaniels offense is very, very, very valuable. We're expecting Drake May to take this big step forward. We like that Mike Vrabel's there. We like that Josh McDaniels is there. And DeMario Douglas could easily emerge as the wide receiver one. Now, I'm very bullish on Stephon Diggs as well, but we got to face the facts that he is a 30-something-year-old receiver coming off of a torn ACL. If he does anything this year, it feels like it's already on borrowed time. DeMario Douglas, still a young guy that's going to be a part of this team for the next couple of years, can establish himself as that number one wide receiver for Drake May. So a guy that I've been very aggressive on. I've got him inside my top 48 in redraft rankings this year. I've got him inside my top 50 wide receivers in dynasty rankings as well. He's kind of a weird player where he's like a little bit too fast to play purely out of the slot, but a little bit too small to play outside. It seems like this year they do want to bounce him inside and outside a little bit more than last year, where he was really glued to that slot position. But either way, just a talented, athletic player who's going to have an opportunity to step up as the number one receiver in what we expect to be a better offense. So, Jeff, I know you're with me on this one. DeMario Douglas is a player that, if you pay attention to these reports coming out of New England, everybody has just been gushing about him.
Yeah, wide receiver 52 last year in half point PPR, going off the board as wide receiver 70. Again, it's the same thing as Zay Flowers, same thing as Jameson Williams. These players that they've already delivered seasons better than their ADP, and they're also in the ascension point of their career, or kind of almost beginning to hit the peak of their career. I just think at the end of the day, targeting those players, checking those boxes, players that are going to hit their prime, that are set up to be able to exceed their ADP or have exceeded their ADP already, are always going to be good bets.
Yeah. And I think that's it. And that's exactly what we were talking about with Jameson Williams, obviously a little bit more expensive, but the same thought process here with DeMario Douglas. Well, I want to thank everybody who took the time to tune in today. Jeff and I, we got a handful of shows coming out between now and kickoff. Once the season actually does start, we've got some really fun ideas for some shows that we're going to be doing, including a show that we did last year that was audio only, where we go through every single matchup, every single week, look through all of the injuries, all the news, all the notes that you need to prepare for your week's matchup. We're going to be doing that and a handful of other in-season shows as well. So if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe. If you're listening on a podcast feed, please drop us a follow. A review would be even better. But I want to thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will see you soon.